Well, hi guys, welcome to the latest episode of this unbelievable life. I have one of my favorite people with me that I got to know and met in my Down syndrome world, going to all the conferences for all those years. And it is such my pleasure to get to be able to catch up with Stephanie Thomspon. She is the director at the National Down Syndrome Adoption Network in Cincinnati. And when I say she's located in Cincinnati, they do these across the country. So these are for domestic adoptions, and she can hook up anybody that wants information. And I just kind of wanted to get the state of things and see where we're at, especially in a post-COVID world, and see how this process works, what it looks like for both sides of the families. And I'm just going to turn it over to her.
Oh, hi. So nice to see you, Nikki. And yes, my name is Stephanie Thomspon. I'm the director of the National Down Syndrome Adoption Network. We are a domestic adoption program. So we're not an agency, but we partner with agencies who have a special focus and an expertise in special needs adoption. So we work in all 50 states. And like Nikki said, I am based in Cincinnati, Ohio, because we are a program of the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Cincinnati. So because of that, we're in Cincinnati, but we will talk to anybody in any time zone, Pacific to Eastern. And our biggest thing is counseling families who receive that prenatal or postnatal Down syndrome diagnosis. So that is our most important piece of work. So what happens is like in 2022, we received 70 calls from either expectant parents, new parents who just had a baby, or agencies representing those families, or agencies representing kiddos in foster care. And we received 70 calls last year. And so we provide counseling, education, Down syndrome parent counseling, connections to parent groups. And then what happens is after counseling with us, they'll either decide, most decide either to make the adoption or make the choice of parenting or make the choice of adoption. And so close to half usually decide to parent after talking with us. And the reason being is when families call us, they are just in deep, deep grief. And that's deeper than when us parents get that diagnosis of Down syndrome like I did. So I have a son who's 31, going to be 31 here soon. And I received a post-birth diagnosis. And I was just in absolute shock, but I bonded quickly to him. And I was like, all right, buddy, my husband and I were like, we got this. We're going to parent you. We're going to celebrate you. You know, we grieve the diagnosis, but we're going to get through this. And so we did. But there are some families who are in a deep, deep grief, and it feels like it's drowning them. So they reach out and they want to just talk. And so the first thing that I do it's very, very important is I say, okay, before we talk about adoption, we are going to talk about getting that diagnosis. So, you know, if you've ever been in a state of grief, you're really not listening to things on the outside. So, you know, everything's in your peripheral. It's all blurry and fuzzy because you're just focused on being in grief. So that's what I do is I counsel the families who contact us directly. And I say, okay, we're just going to sit and you're just going to get it all out. So that could take a few days. That could take a few weeks. I've had families that I walk with them for months in the grief process. And then when they come out of that, they're a little more open and they're okay, I'm clear-headed. Tell me what Down syndrome is. So then we talk about the Down syndrome diagnosis. And that's very, very important to do because a lot of people have antiquated notions about Down syndrome. They were told things that the internet said to them that's not at all correct. So I provide them with accurate, up-to-date information on Down syndrome. And then what we do, and we take our time in each process here, we're taking our time. And then what I do is say, okay, so we've gone through the grief process. We've gone through Down syndrome education. Let's talk about what it would look like to parent. So I let them know I'm a parent. I've been doing this for, a couple of decades. Ask me anything. And I'm very honest with my answers. I'm very authentic. And I tell them about the parenting journey. But I also want to connect them with their local parent group. That's very important. I want to know what their local, I want them to know what their local supports look like. So I introduce them to like the website if they're not ready to call, because a lot of families, if they're on the fence, they don't want to talk directly to parent groups yet, but they will get on the website, or I will make a phone call to the parent group for them saying that there's a family that's just wants to know more information. And so they're seeing, okay, I do have support here if I were to make this parenting decision. And then what happens is they get that local support, kind of indirectly. And then at that point, they're ready to make a decision. And so, like I said, close to half decide to parent. So then we celebrate. I say, congratulations. And then I get them a direct name and contact for their parent group. And then the journey ends there with us, and they'll go on parenting. And then I'll have families say, I appreciate the information and all the time spent. I needed to go through that process, but I still want to make an adoption plan. So we have a registry of families who are home study ready. It's an adoption term, meaning they've been approved by their state, their county, their city, and a private agency to adopt a child with Down syndrome. And so at any given time, we usually have about 40 families who are on our registry. So I will connect the expectant or new family with an agency in their area, and they'll get that hands-on adoption counseling. So not really related to Down syndrome, but they'll get that hands-on adoption counseling. They'll go through that, and the agency will circle back around to me. They'll tell me what the family is looking for in an adoptive family. And then what I do is I go into my registry, put in those parameters, and it kicks out a best fit of families to show to this newer expectant family. And then a family is chosen, a match is made, and then placement occurs after the baby is born. That's really it in a nutshell, but it's extremely emotional. And it's the hardest thing that a family is ever going to go through. It's very heavy. Adoption is a heartbreaking, heavy, hard journey. And so we recognize that, and we know that, but an adoption will happen. And then a beautiful relationship will occur after grieving has happened between the adoptive family and now what's called the birth family. And a beautiful relationship will happen. But really, in a nutshell, that's a main crux of what our work is.
How do people, what are the steps if somebody is interested in adopting versus if somebody wants to get in touch with you because they have received this diagnosis prenatally or postnatally?
It's a great question. So if someone has received this, a diagnosis prenatally, I'm really hoping that they were given information by their medical professional. So be it their OB or the genetic counselor. And I'm hoping that every family gets really informed of all of their options. Adoption is usually left out. And a lot of times it's because medical professionals have no idea that there's a registry of families who want to adopt. They just have no idea. So it doesn't occur to them to say adoption is an option. And so we do have booklets that we created that are free of charge, that we're trying to get out to all the medical professionals who give that diagnosis to expectant families. And it talks about the option of adoption. So hopefully that they receive information that way. And I do know that if you Google Down syndrome adoption, I think we're #1, which is great. So I have a lot of expectant parents and new parents who contact us by Googling Down syndrome adoption, and then our website comes up. And, our contact information, we're very easy to get a hold of through our website. And then if you want to, if you're on the other side and you want to adopt a baby with Down syndrome, and that's another way that people find us is they Google Down syndrome adoption, they get to our website, and we have a great website that has a webinar that I created. It's about an hour long that just takes a huge deep dive into the adoption world and how to adopt a child with Down syndrome. But the most important thing is if you want to adopt a child with Down syndrome, you must have experience and be educated on Down syndrome. So I have a lot of families out there. It's getting more progressive as the years go on, but in the early, because I've been doing this for almost, I think 13 years, but in the early years, it was, oh, I want to adopt a child with Down syndrome because they're happy all the time and full of joy. And we know that that's not true. People with Down syndrome are more like us than they are different, and they're not joyful all the time, just like we're not joyful all the time. So it's very important that families have an education of what Down syndrome is. And I'm talking deep, as in going into the medical issues and the behavioral issues and issues related to speech and what it will look like being a parent of an adult with Down syndrome. So you get all of this, this education, and this experience can be done by joining your local parent group. I can't stress that enough. So if you make this decision, you're like, I'm thinking about, even if you're like, I'm thinking about this, even if you're thinking about it, go ahead and join your local parent group. And if that means getting on the mailing list for right now. And then when you're like, you know what, we're going to pursue a home study, we're going to pursue adoption paperwork to do this. Then you say, okay, parent group, I want to volunteer. I want to be able to go to your workshops that other parents go to, if that's okay. I want to learn. I want to gain all the experience I can, because that's vitally important. And it's different from just a typical adoption. If you want to adopt a baby with special needs or Down syndrome, you must be educated and you must have experience in children with Down syndrome.
What else do you want to share with our audience in terms of what impact this has had on you and just anything in general?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has had an enormous impact on me. And, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my son, Christopher. So, and I just talked briefly about Chris. Let's see, my son will be, like I said, he'll be 31. And he is the light of our life. We have two boys. So we have Christopher, and then we have Cody, who is 3 years younger. And Cody does not have Down syndrome, but Christopher was our first. And my husband and I were childhood sweethearts, got married very young. And 3 years later, along came Christopher. And so I was shocked because, like everybody else in the world, I had always heard that if you have a baby with Down syndrome, it's because you're 40 years old. I remember being told that my whole life. And so here I am, 21, and I'm like, this can't be possible. And so we know now that I'm educated about Down syndrome, that that's not true. There are more women under the age of 40 who have children with Down syndrome. Your chances do increase as you age. So my chance, I believe, is like 1 in 2,300 or something like that. But it happened. And like I said, it was an initial grief, shock. And we did grieve the loss of kind of what we were thinking was going to happen. And but we celebrated him. We loved him, and we just thought immediately, whatever we need to do to give you the best life possible. So we went, jumped on the ground running. So we had Chris, and I ended up a year later, because he was such an easy baby. And my husband has a great job as a firefighter. So he has, he'll work 24 hours and take 2 days off. And I thought, I'm going to get out of the house for a little bit. I'm going to get myself a job. So in 1993, I joined the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Cincinnati, just doing administrative work. And it just kind of went from there. I fell in love with the group, and I was with it as it grew. And the next thing I know, I'm counseling new parents, and then I'm helping with different programs and going to conferences and doing medical outreach. And then in 2010, I was asked by the executive director at the DSAGC if I would want to kind of do a refresh of the adoption program that they had, which has been around. The adoption program had been around since 1982. And it's a beautiful, wonderful program. It was founded by Robin and David Steele. And what happened in 2010, there was nothing online about it. So we're like, let's put this online. Let's create a brochure. Let's create a booklet for medical professionals. And so 2010 was starting that. We just breathed new life into the program. And then in 2015, I believe, I became director. And then we've just been, riding the wave ever since of supporting families and supporting families on both sides who want to adopt a child with Down syndrome, and then counseling those who receive that diagnosis. So it's been an absolutely wonderful, beautiful ride.
You're just doing such a phenomenal job, and I find you to be so inspirational. And I appreciate you taking the time to share your story and tell us about your unbelievable life. And if anybody has any questions about this, they're always welcome to you reach out to me, that I can put you in touch, put them in touch with you, or they can, Google you guys directly. But, again, Down syndrome adoption is such a wonderful thing. And if people need the resources, I truly encourage them to reach out in either direction, because like I said, it's an amazing thing. Stephanie, thank you so much for being on this episode. And if anybody has any questions, y'all know where to find me. And again, thank you for sharing your unbelievable life.
Thank you for having me on.